Pokémon Day 2025 is right around the corner, and there are tons of insane theories floating around the internet. What if they announced an entirely new game, or teased the next generation of Pokémon? The most popular idea for a new game, not including Legend ZA of course, is a remake for Black and White. This was way more popular around a year ago when we had no idea what games were coming next, but there's still a good amount of people desperately holding on to this idea. Since Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl released in 2021, Black and White are next in line for remakes, but real believers think there's even more evidence than just this. The main argument a year ago was how much Unova was being represented in every corner of Pokémon, and to be fair, this argument is only getting stronger as time goes on. Scarlet and Violet's Paradox Pokémon seems to be quite focused on Pokémon from Unova, as it had the second highest amount of representation, with 7 of the 22 Paradox Pokémon being based on Generation 5 Pokémon. Additionally, the only Pokémon to receive both a past and future form, excluding Cyclizar, are either from Johto or Unova. Even Generation 5's Swords of Justice got a huge focus as well. Unova also had a huge role in the second part of Scarlet and Violet's DLC, the Indigo Disc. Not only was it set in Unova, but it also featured references to locations in Unova, remixes of music from Black and White, as well as references to various characters from Black and White. And this was more than enough to convince people that a Black and White remake was going to be announced in 2024, but it never came around, obviously. This didn't stop them though, as only a few weeks after Pokémon Day 2024, a new company called The Pokémon Works was registered, with many people speculating it to be a collaboration between the Pokémon Company and ILCA, the developers of the previous remakes Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl. This did turn out to be true as well, with it being officially announced months later. In September 2024, trademarks were registered for Black Bolt and White Flare, leading many fans to jump to the conclusion that these were the titles for Black and White remakes, but they were actually trademarks for the trading card game. Some fans will argue, however, that this still supports the idea of Black and White remakes. Finally, in Pokemon Go, an event called the Pokemon Go Tour Unova is scheduled to run from the 21st of February to the 2nd of March, around the same time as Pokemon Day, where these hypothetical Black and White remakes would be revealed. The main issue with a lot of these bits of evidence is that none of them really hold up too well if you spend a bit too much time thinking about it. Sure, Unova is the second most represented region when it comes to Paradox Pokemon, but if it was meant to hint towards remakes of Black and White, why wouldn't they be the most represented instead of being behind Johto? While the Pokemon Works was established partly by ILCA, this doesn't mean they have to work on, only remakes. They could just as easily be helping with development on whatever Pokemon projects are currently in development. For example, the Pokemon Works' first project was taking over development from the mobile game Pokemon Sleep. Black and White are getting dedicated TCG sets released later this year, but it's already well known that Scarlet and Violet's lifetime is expected to be around a year longer than other modern Pokemon games. There's only so many sets you can release based around Scarlet and Violet before they all start just becoming the same thing. Plus, the Indigo Disc was set in Unova. Why wouldn't they make a TCG set based around Pokemon from that region? It doesn't necessarily hint towards the games being remade. In fact, there's even more evidence to suggest that we're not getting Black and White remakes anytime soon. For example, remakes have previously had pretty large gaps between release. After Fire Red and Leaf Green, there was a 5-year gap before Heart Gold and Soul Silver were released. Another 5-year gap separated these titles from Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, and then players had to wait 7 years before Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl. If there is another 5 to 7 year gap between remakes, this could make us wait between 2026 and 2028 until these Black and White remakes release. And to be fair, this could point us in the direction of a early 2026 release, similar to Legends Arceus. On top of this, however, remakes have always been released on different consoles. Fire Red and Leaf Green released on the GBA, Heart Gold and Soul Silver released on the DS, Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire on the 3DS, followed by Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl on the Switch. There's no 2 remakes on the same console, if that makes sense. If we follow this pattern, we likely won't see Black and White remakes until this series moves to the Switch 2, which could potentially take another year or two. There's another video on this channel that goes into much more depth about when Pokemon will move to the Switch 2, and it's probably a bit later than you'd think. Finally, Pokemon Go tours focused around certain regions have happened 4 times already, and none of them pointed towards new remakes or new games whatsoever. Kanto was the focus for Pokemon Day 2021, Johto for Pokemon Day 2022, Hoenn for 2023, Sinnoh for 2024, and now Unova for 2025. This will probably continue with Kalos in 2026, Alola in 2027, all the way to Generation 10's region in 2030. Okay, hear me out here. What if instead of Generation 5 remakes, we instead got a remake or a remaster of Pokemon X and Y? This theory is supported by a lot less evidence, with the main argument pretty much being the fact that Legends Arceus was released alongside Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl, which were remakes for the original games that inspired Legends Arceus. Following this pattern, why not release remakes or remasters for X and Y, the games that inspired Legends ZA? I'm sure I don't need to talk too much about why this would be a bad idea. First of all, we can't just skip Black and White, you know? I've heard a lot of people say that the Indigo disc was meant to take the role of a Black and White remake, meaning they could remake X and Y this year or next year, but that's almost certainly not the case. Even if it was just a remaster, why? Why would they just re-release an old, beloved game with a new coat of paint and nothing else? Okay, I see what you did there, but that was different. Pokemon's 30-year anniversary is happening just next year. I would really hope they have more important and monumental games to work on. Like, what about Generation 10? In fact, there's a small number of fans who think that these games could be teased during Pokemon Day 2025. While this would be interesting, there's not really any evidence to support this. The only argument is that each generation's debut title, like Sword and Shield or Scarlet and Violet, have been released every 3 years since the release of Black and White in 2010. Why now, after 15 years, would they break this cycle? We'll talk more about Generation 10's release date in a short moment, but even if Generation 10 isn't being released until 2026, surely you could still put a little teaser for it in Pokemon Day 2025, right? And hey, it would be pretty cool, but I think it would distract a bit too much from the main talking point of Pokemon Day, as well as what is likely the only Pokemon game to be released in 2025. I imagine they'll want the next few months leading up to ZA's release to be entirely focused on that game, with new teasers, new trailers, new gameplay, new Pokemon. And talking about all of this super exciting new stuff in Legends ZA, you don't want to miss any of it, right? If you subscribe to Radio Mochi, you'll never miss anything like this ever again. I also have something really exciting to announce when Pokemon Day rolls around, and it might involve me giving away some rare, shiny Pokemon. I'm pretty sure you won't want to miss that, so I'd recommend subscribing and turning on notifications to hear more about it later. Anyway, we know that Legends ZA is likely releasing around July to September, so Generation 10, or any other game really, releasing 2 to 4 months later is incredibly unlikely. 2022 was the first year since 1996 where another game was released in the same year as a new generation's debut, with Legends Arceus releasing in January 2022 and Scarlet and Violet in November 2022, but even then that was a 10-month gap, so it's pretty safe to say that Legends ZA will be the only game released this year. In fact, the Pokemon Company's COO stated in an interview from August 2023 that they are regularly releasing product on a fairly fixed kind of a cadence, but there's more and more conversations about how they can continue to do this while making sure that they are still ensuring really quality products. Releasing Legends ZA in the second half of 2025, followed by another game in November 2025 or early 2026, followed by another game in late 2026, it hardly feels like that's what they meant by ensuring quality products. Ooh, what if instead of a new game, we got to see a new Pokemon? What about a new Eeveelution? This is actually a really popular theory, especially with the Year of Eevee celebration happening throughout 2025. A new Eeveelution would be a great way to create more excitement and drive even more sales for merchandise. I've already discussed the possibility of a new Eeveelution in another video on this channel, talking about hints in Scarlet and Violet that could possibly point towards it, but there's been a few more talking points since I released that video. I originally settled on the idea of a Dragon-type Eeveelution, being a sort of counterpart to Sylveon since they'd both be found in Kalos, but the latest theory instead talks about a Flying-type Eevee. To celebrate Pokemon Day 2025 and to fall in line with the Year of Eevee celebration I mentioned earlier, a special Eevee trading card is being released in Europe. Also, fun fact, this is actually our first look at the logo for Pokemon Day 2025. It's identical to last year's logo, but it's still exciting. And on top of this, a special distribution was announced to celebrate Pokemon Day, giving away a special Flying Terra-type Eevee. As soon as this was announced, there were hundreds of people saying this has to be a hint towards a Flying-type Eeveelution. Hey, look, that's me. Anyway, while I love the idea of a new Eeveelution, I don't think this was meant to be a hint. This isn't the first time we've seen a random distribution for a Pokemon with the Flying Terra type. A special Pikachu with this Terra type was given away as an early purchase bonus for Scarlet and Violet as a reference to Flying Pikachu, and much more randomly, a Flying Terra type Lechonk was given away in April 2023 across North America and Europe to celebrate the release of Scarlet and Violet's first TCG set. So what, we're gonna get a Flying type evolution for Lechonk as well? This Flying Terra type Eevee is a bit unexpected, but I don't think it's really anything out of the blue. The final nail in the Flying type Eeveelution's coffin is the fact that this Flying Terra type Eevee distribution is only available in the US, Canada, and Australia. If this was meant to be a super important hint to a highly anticipated Pokemon being announced soon, you'd think they'd distribute it across Europe and Asia. Okay, so the Flying type Eeveelution theory is off the table, but what about a new mythical Pokemon instead? This is probably the first one of these theories that I actually agree with. It kind of does seem to line up. A lot of mythical Pokemon are distributed and announced alongside Pokemon movies. Zarude was released alongside Secrets of the Jungle, Zeraora was released alongside The Power of Us, and so on. Is it possible that we see a new Pokemon movie announced alongside a brand new mythical Pokemon? First, let's look at the recent history of mythical Pokemon. The last Pokemon movie released was, as I mentioned earlier, Secrets of the Jungle. It was revealed in January 2020 with a release date of July 2020 in Japan, but was delayed to December due to the other important thing that was happening in 2020. 2021 was then the first year since Mewtwo Strikes Back, released in 1998, to not feature a Pokemon movie, and we haven't seen one since. With the Pokemon Horizons animated series seemingly reaching its climax, it would be the perfect time to announce a new movie with the main characters from Pokemon Horizons discovering a new mythical Pokemon. On top of this, there's currently no news on any events happening in Scarlet and Violet from now until the release of Generation 10. A new mythical Pokemon could easily be in store. But what are you most excited to see announced for Pokemon Day this month? For me, it's the obvious option, a new trailer for Legends ZA. I'm really excited to hear when it's being released. If you're in the same boat as me, there's actually a video on screen that you can click right now that will tell you all about when the game is most likely to release, as well as 2 new Mega Evolutions we could be getting.